Hello, entrepreneurs, and welcome back to another course video. Once again, I'm Cira. Let's start our lecture discussion on customer segments, the second box of the business model canvas. Consider for this box, who are your customers and what job do they want you to do? And if that's something that sounds familiar from the value proposition discussion, it's because value propositions and customer segments are intertwined. The core question to answer for customer segments is, for whom are you creating value? And we're going to ask you to really get to know your customers and be specific about who they are and why they're going to buy from you. We already learned from the value proposition video that customers have problems or pains to be relieved and aspirations, which you could create benefits or gains around. And we know that when customer segments are matched with validated value propositions, you'll get product market fit. So different customer segments are going to have different value propositions that apply to them and that they care about. And like I said, we're searching for the jobs that customers want done. So consider which jobs your customers care about. Is it increasing revenue, decreasing cost, getting new clients, or keeping up with competitors? Also, consider how important these jobs are to them and how often they think about the problem or how much time they spend solving the problem now. Think about what they're currently doing to solve the problem. What products are they buying? What are the issues associated with the current process? And when thinking about who your customers are, you must also know what kind of market you're operating within. Is it an existing market, a resegmented market, a new market, or a clone market? Existing markets usually involve improving on an already served need for known customers. Resegmented markets is when the product is redefined and usually more niche, which will involve a more marketing-driven approach. New markets is when the customer is unknown and there's no competition because it's truly something that hasn't existed before. Usually this will require some sort of education to the market or even creating an entirely new class of customers that hasn't existed before. And a clone market, the customers are most likely known, but now it's going to be specific to a new location. Now, what happens if you have a multi-sided market? Who's the customer? And the answer is both sides of the customer. Each is going to have their own value proposition and their own revenue stream. The main way to determine if you have a multi-sided market is if one side cannot exist without the other. And an example of this is for mobile apps where the consumer is the end user and maybe the corporate customer is the payer. Which leads me to discuss customer types and customer archetypes or customer personas. A customer archetype is really like a customer profile. It might include what their position is, their title, their role in their company. Also, how do they buy? Do they have a discretionary budget? If they do, how much is that discretionary budget? What matters to them? Who influences them? Who's in their ecosystem? A really good way to explore customer archetypes is to try to understand and to ask in interviews about their day-to-day life. Consider where your problem and your solution fit in their everyday. So that was customer archetypes. For customer types, you want to assign roles to the players in your ecosystem. So let's use The Simpsons as an example. If Bart wants to buy or wants to get a hoverboard, and these are all the people in his ecosystem, how could we turn each of these into customer types? Consider in this scenario, who is the influencer, the recommender, the decision maker, economic buyer, or saboteur, if Bart is going to be the user. So this is just one example of what that ecosystem might look like. All of the people involved in the adoption process of the product and the possible flow of information and decisions that could take place. Maybe you came up with a different iteration of this, but this is just one example. Now, the BART example was an example of a consumer product, but for B2B companies, you need to consider and be able to satisfy the entire company ecosystem in order to get that company to acquire your product. So knowing each of their roles and each of their motivations is really important. So as you talk to the different customers in your ecosystem, and you should be trying to talk to all the customers in your ecosystem, you can create a customer ecosystem map to show how each customer type and each customer segment interact with one another. So I'm going to show some examples of some previous I-Corps teams that created customer ecosystem maps, just so you can see all the possibilities of what could be included in your ecosystem map. So here's an example of a former I-Corps team that had a micro device for blood typing. And I wanted to show here that they spoke to customers both on the back end and front end of the customer experience. They also included things like payment or reimbursement flows. And then if you look closely, you can see that they followed the movement of their product and showed how it was moving between each box and where it was going after. This team had a timber detection technology. And what I really wanted to show here was all the different lines that they were able to include on this chart, meaning that they spoke to many different people in the ecosystem to really understand what was going on here. And they were even able to identify a saboteur in the ecosystem, as you can see from the top left. And what this team actually was able to uncover was a new need in the industry that they didn't know existed until talking to all of the players in the ecosystem. And they also really clearly highlighted their company's role in the process at the bottom. Their company's name is, or their team name in I-Corps was ChemDetect. You can choose to organize your ecosystem maps however you like. These are just some examples to help you get started. Like this team who had a pediatric toy for education. They chose to color code the diagram and label what was happening between the roles. And they were also able to uncover information about their channels, which they chose to include as well, which is something you'll be able to do with many customer discovery interviews. So as you continue customer discovery, consider who is your user, your influencer, recommender, decision maker, economic buyer, and ask questions in interviews to really understand how the ecosystem works. You can map it out before an interview and show it in the interview and ask if you're correct in your assumptions. If you're lucky, they'll correct you and they'll help you draw it more accurately. Okay, just to wrap up, when you create your customer ecosystem maps for your product and for your company, be sure to include the different customer types. Try to illustrate as best as possible the flow of product, information, or money between the different boxes. And don't forget to show how your company fits in the ecosystem. Please bring your ecosystem maps to office hours and work on trying to talk to as many players in the ecosystem as possible. Good luck.